John. Yeah, yeah, difficult to follow. Loads of good things been said already. Probably all of which I agree with. Capitalism is the most efficient economic system in the world, except it's not, and we know that, don't we? Our experience in the telecom industry is a story of profits for the few at the expense of the many, how it's very efficient for getting shareholders their profits, but it's not so efficient for workers and for customers. And I think that's the theme that's come out here. But we're criticising privatisation, those of us here from unions, from the workers' perspective, but also from the customer or the consumer's perspective. I mean, I'll give you a potted history of what's in here. Privatisation in telecom, one of the first and apparently most successful, 1984. But already before 1984, the GPO, as it was called, which I sometimes used to be called when I used to go knock on people's doors when I used to mend phones. It's the lady from the GPO. That's what I'm using because I never saw it. Basically, before then, telecoms was massively profitable, but capitalists couldn't leave it like that, could they? They wanted the profits for themselves. The first thing they did was actually create a duopoly. They created BT, and then they brought in Mercury as a way of getting into the market. But liberalisation of the whole sector really took place at the end of the 80s, at the early 90s, and coincidentally, that coincided with massive job cuts. There was profits being made before then at the beginning of privatisation, but a hell of a lot more profits were made when there were massive job cuts. While I started working at AEA in 1991, I think it was, no, 93 it might have been. It was early 90s, 30,000 people left in one day from BT because of the job cuts as a result of the liberalisation. Some of them obviously went to work in other parts of the telecom industry, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them were paid off, voluntary redundancy, out of the pension fund that all of us contribute to. So I mean, I'm not begrudging those people that money. They worked hard. But the point was that that's how they save the money, by actually paying people off. The massive productivity there is in the telecom sector is driven by that. It's driven by new technology and the massive changes in technology there have been. That obviously is a real. As long as you invest in it, you get a lot more money out of it. But it's also been the result of the massive job cuts and also the way in which they organise the work. So we all have to work much harder, to put it simply. And along with that, you get massive stress at work. You get a lot of people going off sick. You get a lot of people who can't keep up, being forced out. What else you see under privatisation we've seen is the fact there's been a shift. The subsidy of all the different services that are offered in the telecom sector, you can actually sort of trace it from privatisation onwards. Before, you could pool everything and say domestic customers or even small businesses, you'd have cross-subsidy, but the way that the regulatory system worked meant that actually the services that got made a lot cheaper were those provided to big business. Two ways of giving capitalist profits, one from the profits from the industry and the other to the profits. There's also a whole lot of other stories to be said about how there were cutbacks in training. I mean, the nature of the telecom industry is such that you have to be, you need a skilled workforce, that's the nature of it. But capitalists always want to underinvest in training. And it's still the case now that I meet lots of people who were trained up 20, 30 years ago, under public service, and they're still working in the industry. And the sort of training that's on offer for a lot of the young people today is a lot of it substandard, and it doesn't lead to anything good in the end. And also there's less obvious career paths. So there's a whole load of ways in which people lose out. I think I wanted to bring in a couple of areas as well, because there is, I very much believe, and we put it in our pamphlet, that there's a real big myth out there about private sector efficiency. And I think Andrew's written about it, and when you actually look, even the most sort of like techie area, in terms of like, you'd think, well, that would be obvious, they wouldn't invest in that because they would get more profits out of it. And you see, might be some logic to it. If you actually look at what happened, it's quick fix. They put in substandard technologies. They think about 3 or 4 years hence, when actually, when you're doing the whole network over the whole country, or you're talking about things that are changing in technology, you have to think 10, 15, 20 years ahead. You have to put billions and billions of pounds out there. But if you've got a market with all different firms competing with each other, no one's ever going to come to a consensus that they actually want to spend the money. So it's really, even in their own terms, there's a lot of argument about capitalism being very inefficient in terms of providing infrastructure, which is why in large parts of Europe, in other parts of the country, other countries, you actually do get, you still get a degree of public ownership of telecom because it makes capitalist sense. I think, like Janine and like Andrew, I think there's a much bigger and wider case to make for public ownership as a social good, but just even in capitalism's own terms, there's a big question mark about whether it's efficient. Also, the telecom sector has seen the worst successes of capitalism. Remember the telecom bubble back in 2000? Really, it's the same sort of stuff that happened under Enron and happened in the financial crash. Hollywood capitalists getting together, getting loads of money, rating each other's companies at higher prices, getting themselves paid a hell of a lot more, overinflating everything, and suddenly there's a bubble. And it's the same thing that happened at Enron. I mean, everyone's seen the film. You know, they did it in an absurd degree. It's like betting on the future and the weather and things. But the telecom bubble, they just basically rated each other's firms too much. And that's exactly what we got in the crash, wasn't it? Passing up debt, calling it credit. It's absurdity. When taken to that level, it's absurdity. But it's all about rigging the market, calling it competitive, and actually it being a facade behind which you can actually dole out profits to your friends. It's really as simple as that. But yet you'd believe, wouldn't you, that competition is a good thing. We get told that all the time. It's the default of all lazy policy wonks to talk about the need to have more competition. Like what's the problem with the energy industry? There's loads of problems with the energy industry. Competition is not one of them. You know, I mean, it's the easy thing that people go back to. I mean, competition is ideological. It's actually believing that we've got to be all ready tooth and claw and compete with each other, and that's the best way things can be. You could get quite human, you know, quite into all of that. But it also is just not true. And I find it amazing. I mean, people tell me why. How can it be that you know, even now after the crash of 2008, people actually believe in that ideology? I'll give you more examples about how in the telecom sector it's nothing to do with competition. It's all about really how the whole thing's rigged. You probably have seen many test cases in the courts about one telecom firm taking another for interconnection charges and all that sort of thing. What bits of the profits they will take, and that's all about the fact that if you make a decision in that way, one firm makes like, you know, $500 million profit, another one doesn't. So they fight it all out in the courts. There's nothing actually to do with anything about the development of the industry. We need to talk about, I agree with what people have said here, we need to talk about the democratic control of industry if we're going to be talking about public ownership. We can't just talk about ownership per se. We have ownership because we want to control something, and we want to control something for a reason. Miliband, shockingly, said something I agreed with the other day. He said, markets need rules. I thought, well, that's a step in the right direction. Yeah, I think we've noticed. But, I mean, that is quite important. That's where we've got to go. And what I find despairing is that we in the workers' movement, and I think that's true of a lot of trade union leaders, are not actually taking all the experience we've got with the privatisation, which we've got, you know, all the people who are in the different unions, and actually saying, we know it bloody doesn't work, and we're demanding. We're not just saying, oh, yeah, market can be a bit funny sometimes. We've got the evidence there, we know what went wrong. We should make making demands as a case. I mean, there are self-interests if you're a trade unionist in terms of actually being against privatisation, because the story in our industry is the same as elsewhere. You get union busting, you get a weakened trade union organisation, trade unions get less members through privatisation. And that's very much the case we've got some of the worst union busters in our industry. Virgin Media, they de-recognised the union before they sold, Richard Branson sold it off for a profit just last year. We've got Sky owned by Rupert Murdoch. Really, we, for example, in my own branch, we have several hundred members in both Virgin Media and Sky. It's really difficult to organise there because of the way it is. But you can still, the other way in which it's against our interests is the fact that if you have the competition that you do have, you get a race to the bottom. You get the market setting the standards, not being able to raise labour standards. I've just come from a meeting, very depressing meeting actually. BT, you might have seen they announced yesterday they're taking on 1,600 new engineers in BT Open, which is where I work. They've been taking tranches of people on in BT Open Reach over the last sort of few years, but they want to employ the new people coming on at starting rates of 17,000 when currently people start at about 21,000, and then they get market rates that go up. They're bringing them in on 3 months sick pay rather than 6 months sick pay, and they're putting 20% into their bonuses, and they're all new young people coming in. And what we're doing, those of us on the left of the union, are trying to say to our executive, you cannot sell out the next generation. This cannot be done. It's not in our interest, two-tier workforce, but it's also, you know, we cannot. also morally we can't do that. And it's cutting your own throats. The experience of those, it's not interesting, what BT's proposing is exactly what happens in Virgin Media and Sky to a lesser extent, take people back, where you've got a lot of subcontracting out, you've got a lot of people working on bonus, and you've got a lot of people at lower rates, people paying for their own tools, people paying for their own clothing, people on piecework being paid per day for their work. I mean, that's where you go if you don't I've got 2 minutes to tell you all about what's wrong with superfast broadband. But I think you probably know that despite us living in the 4th biggest economy in the world, the infrastructure of telecom is rated 14th in the UK, 16th for connection speed. There are 8 billion people out there unconnected. This could all have been different. When I first got involved in the union, early 90s, our union, not that we're brilliant or anything, or even research, we had a thing called Network for the Future. We had an agreement, we thought, with the Labour government to actually cable up the whole country. It didn't happen, and this is what we got instead. Instead, instead Telecom, what they did when Labour came in, they basically went along with the regulatory structure we've got now. Exactly the same as what the Tories do. Instead of actually doing that. So what's happening now is it's all being done piecemeal. It's all being done too late. Could have been so different if it had been planned properly and it had been done. I was going to say a couple of things about what's the whole point. I mean, it is really important. The telecom industry is really vital for economic growth, and I'm not saying that because I'm some mad person who thinks we should all have loads more consumer goods. Economic growth is a good thing. It's about us creating wealth so we can actually distribute it. And I think that's quite important that we recognise. I mean, capitalism, we all know, it's grotesque inequalities, the way it wastes resources, the way it wastes people. It, makes you work really hard, and then you get disabled or old, and then it throws you out. How it deforms the whole system, so everything's accounted for in terms of money. But capitalism is the most efficient economic system humanity has ever devised so far. But actually, we have the possibility of creating a better system, and that better system will be based on the social relations of production created under capitalism. In the industry such as mine, it will be about all the interconnections. It's amazing. Communications technology, the way we can talk to people in the other side of the world. But the reality is that's all done for profit. It's not done for people talking to each other, encouraging our communication as a human species. It's not done because we can actually do loads of social things. We can do things much better environmentally if we develop it. No. It's all done for profit. So the issue there is, capitalism stands condemned, even though it's the most efficient system, because what it doesn't do that it could do. And the only way we can get our own economic system, take it away from the silly idea of this market madness, and own it ourselves, is by having public ownership and democratic control. And that's the only way we can actually create the possibilities. I was going to say something about Royal Mail, but I've been told to stop. And just to say, the issue of Royal Mail, very, very summary, is a very different story from the telecom, what I've told you about the telecom. But it has the same familiar theme. The Labour government, it wasn't just the fact that the Labour government was a bit ambiguous about privatisation. You remember Mandelson. But we beat him eventually. That was a really good thing. And of course, then when this coalition government came in, it all went pear-shaped. But the problem was right from the beginning. The 2000 Postal Services Act is based on the idea of regulation, competition, exactly the same as what they did with the telecoms industry when they said they wouldn't invest. It's exactly the same, and that's actually quite important because what happened was liberalisation happened before privatisation. The deterioration in the postal services happened before privatisation. Even my good friends who work for Royal Mail will tell you that. And that, we stand there in despair seeing that happen. And just one other little point, as we're on the verge of the European elections, the British government went much further than the European people asked them to. Just remember, there are bad European capitalists, but they're very bad British capitalists too, and I think we should be against all of them. So just to make that point about, don't blame Europe. It's about our own capitalists here, and we have to fight them. And I'll just finish on that. We have to fight them. We have to take the lessons of the 2008, which we haven't managed to do, demystify all the ideas of competition, the market, and actually build solidarity across class lines, blue collar, white collar, people who are lower level managers together with people who are workers, people in financial services who aren't the profit makers but are the people who might be made redundant by some banking firm or other. We've all got to get together, and as political trade unionists we need to make a demand on the trade union movement as a whole. Britain needs a pay rise, but it needs a hell of a lot more, and also make demands on the Labour Party. And now is the time. I'll just echo what Janine said. Public ownership is popular. Public ownership is popular over the post. We know that. I think it'd be very easy to convince people that public ownership of telecom, one of the best kept secrets of the trade union movement, is actually our union's policy. This is the time when we can convince people of that, and it's a vote winner. We should make that demand of the trade union leadership and of the Labour Party.